Grunt Night. What's a grunt?
Ground pounder.
A ground pounder. It's an infantry soldier. A lot of times when I give this lecture to my students, they have no idea. They think I'm talking about the sound. I'm not. I'm talking about this is an infantry battle. Most of the photographs you'll see here come from the men who participated, are the Signal Corps taking photographs of those men taken out of yearbooks that were made for the units. So in almost every case, these are the actual men I've talked to or that I've heard about. So the battle is called the Battle of Zakhemi. It doesn't look like that, but that's how you would say it, Zakhemi. It happened early in the war. It was a one-day battle, which is a little unusual for battles in Vietnam. When I tell my students this, I usually say there's a whole lot about this battle that's very typical of Vietnam battles. And I can point those out to you. But there's also things about this battle that are very unique. That it went on so long was unique because most battles in Vietnam, you might have heard the term firefight. It's over in an instant. This one's going to go on for hours. Just as introduction, after I started doing the research, I attended a reunion in Nashville. It was the first time the men of this unit had gotten together since this particular battle. The reunion was for this battle. And this was back in 2001. As far as I'm concerned, it's one of the most important days of my life was being able to see those men get together again because of what they experienced, and that I was able to actually help some of those guys get there, contacting them, getting them in touch with their friends. After the reunion, I was interviewing different veterans, and I also wanted to have a way to find even more veterans of this particular unit. So I set up a website, and in the website I had stories from the reunion, stories that these guys had told me of their time in Vietnam, and they would send me photographs that I would post on the website. And back in 2002, I received this photograph. And I was working on the computer trying to put this on this website. Now I know a little bit of computer HTML language, but I know very little. So it takes me a long, long time to put anything on the website. So I'm working on my computer, and I hear my then 5-year-old son say, "Daddy, come play." He's in the next room. His next room is the playroom. "Daddy, come play." "Daddy's working right now. Daddy will be in a minute." He's heard this before. I don't know, 30 minutes later, "Daddy, come play." "Daddy's still working," because I'm trying to get this right. "Daddy will be in a minute." And over, "Daddy, come play. Daddy, come play," until finally my 5-year-old son comes into the room. And he stood behind me because I'm working at the desk trying to get this picture right on the computer. And he looked down at that photograph and he said, "Daddy, who are those boys?" Out of the mouths of babes. He didn't say, "Daddy, who are those soldiers? Daddy, who are those men?" He said, "Daddy, who are those boys?" And it hit me. I mean, I met these men when they were middle-aged. And I hear the stories, I see the pictures. But it really came home to me then that they were 18 years old. They were 19 years old when they were over there. One of the men, boys, men, soldiers in this picture is not going to come back from Vietnam. He's going to die in this battle. So, what is Long Grunt Night? What this lecture is and isn't. because I try to be fairly specific on this lecture, though you can't read it. It's not a debate about the right or wrong of the war. That's not what this lecture is about. It's about those boys instead. Boys, men, and soldiers, because they're all three. One of the reasons why I'm interested in military stories is I ask myself what I would do if I was 18 years old in that situation, because I was still a kid. I can't imagine how to handle that, but these guys had to cope. And to a lesser extent, the mistakes made in fighting the war tactically. That does not mean, again, it's not passing judgment on the right or wrong of the war, but they did some things wrong. They got them into a situation. And some of the things that they got wrong, they were ordered to do. It wasn't because those soldiers, those boys made a mistake. It was because the generals in charge made a mistake. Okay, and it is also a harbinger of Vietnam combat. If you studied this battle, you could pretty much know what was going to happen in Vietnam battles for the next 8 years. In fact, this battle was included in a book about lessons learned. You always do that after combat. You have a report, you look at things that you might learn to do better. They actually published this to talk about what they could do better from the lessons they had learned in this battle. And yet they continued to do the same things, meaning that over and over again there are going to be American soldiers who die making the same kind of mistakes that were made in this battle, which occurred at the beginning of the Vietnam War, or close to the beginning. So it's not an indictment of the Americans or the Vietnamese combatants. I'm going to tell you about some atrocities committed by American soldiers. I don't judge them. And I don't judge them because I wasn't there. And I didn't experience what they experienced. So I'm going to tell you a couple of things that should at least make you a little queasy. And yet I don't think of them as, oh, he was an awful guy. Okay, so it's a retelling of human beings in inhuman conditions. War, I don't believe, is glorious. I believe that war makes you less, not more, because they take human beings and they put them in conditions that human beings shouldn't have to go through. All right, this particular photograph comes from the Houston Post. Do y'all remember the Houston Post? Yes. Of course, it's gone now, but the week after the battle, this photograph was posted. Those are men of this unit being carried out of the jungle by engineers. They had to be rescued. And I mentioned that at the beginning because this battle took place when William Westmoreland was in charge of American forces in Vietnam. And William Westmoreland wrote a autobiography in which he stated early, and I think he states it often, but I know he stated early in the book, American forces under my command were never defeated. So you read a little further in the book, and then about page 173, it says, well, there was this one time. This is about that one time. This group of men, it was a single infantry company, so about 130 men were out in the jungle at that time. Now, a company of men is much larger than that, over 200, but you always have a certain number of men who aren't out with the unit. They're in the hospital, they're being transferred home, other people coming into the unit. For various reasons, they're never at strength. So there are about 130 effectives out in the jungle for this battle. Out of that 130 men, 80% will be killed or wounded. 80%, do the math. I think that's 104, 106. It was so bad in this battle that I interviewed one man who as he looked around and saw his friends being killed and wounded, and he was not wounded, he said, when I was finally hit, and he was shot in the shoulder, shattered his shoulder, he said, when I was finally hit, he said, I didn't say that immediately, he said, but later I went, oh good, because that will show I was fighting. Because some of these men didn't fight. When this happened, several of them fell to the ground and never fought throughout the entire battle. They hugged the ground. I think that probably is what I would have done, but this is not a typical Vietnam battle. 40 of them are killed in action, 40. A typical Vietnam engagement, unless you're talking about a huge battle with many units, you might have 1 or 2 killed, and it's over immediately. Instead, we're talking about a situation where 130 men are going to be fighting for something like 18 hours and 80% casualties, 40 of them killed in action. Now that's killed in action. There's another way you die after you've been in combat. It's where you die of wounds. And many of these men made it off the battlefield, went to the hospital, and then died in the hospital. One poor guy was in the hospital for 6 weeks in Vietnam. His legs had been shot to pieces. And finally, it seemed that he was getting well enough that they were going to transfer him to a hospital in Japan. In the process of moving him, so transit from Vietnam to Japan, he went into shock and died. So actually, many more men died than the 40 that are listed. In this battle, Viet Cong soldiers will come in, penetrate the perimeter, and wherever they find American wounded, they murder them. Now, I wrote this when I was doing research. I also used this as my thesis for my master's. And when my professor read this, he said, well, you can't really call it murder. It was a battle. And I said, I've interviewed over 50 of the survivors, and every one of them called it murder. The men who were killed, in most instances, were so badly hurt that they were not a threat. And I'll tell you some instances of this happening, and you can decide for yourself whether it was murder. I'm convinced it was murder. In this one engagement, where it was one company of men, 2 men received the Medal of Honor, our highest military award. Now, you can have a huge battle and no one receive the Medal of Honor. But in this particular battle, it was so savage, and the actions of all were so, or not all, but many were so heroic, that 2 received the Medal of Honor. Both were posthumous. Both men died in battle. How did they get to this point then? I need to walk you through some of that so you can see why the things happened the way they did. They are from the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One. Those guys typically refer to it as the Bloody Red One. They have a patch on the side of their arm, a big red one. It was Charlie Company, 2nd of the 16th Infantry Regiment. They called themselves Rangers. They were not Rangers like today we think of Rangers, trained in a certain way. That was just the nickname they had taken. They were professionals. This is at the beginning of the Vietnam War. And oftentimes the Vietnam War is portrayed as a bunch of draftees who didn't want to be there and didn't know what they were doing. At the beginning of the war, that was not the case. These men who went over had been in the Army, in most cases, for a couple of years or more. Career men who, when we decided to deploy to Vietnam, hey, you're going to go over there. So, in every case, the men that I interviewed referred to themselves as professional soldiers, even the ones who were drafted. They still feel that they were professional because they weren't there just to be a body filling quotas. They're doing their duty. My students oftentimes, I don't think, even know what that word means. But for American males of a certain age in those days, you knew you were going to go into the Army or go into the military. That was your duty as an American. In fact, many of these guys, again, who were drafted, said, before they were drafted, said, I joined, I knew I was going to have to go anyway. I mean, my brother joined, and he was in this unit. That's, by the way, the reason why I was interested in the 1st Infantry Division, was because not in this particular unit, he did not fight in this battle. He was in another battle a few months earlier, but he was on tanks. But he was at the 1st Infantry Division. But yeah, if you could, you wanted some other kind of duty. However, these men they expressed to me that it was their duty to be in the military, and they were fighting communism. So again, I'm not saying whether Vietnam was right or wrong, but to these guys, almost to a man, they were doing something to protect this country. They were also friends. Most of these men had worked together in the Army for years. I'm going to tell you a couple of stories about NCOs, non-commissioned officers, sergeants, who knew each other for years. A case where one was a best man at a wedding. One case, 2 of the sergeants were about to get out of the Army. Their buddy was not about to get out, and they got orders for Vietnam. They went out drinking to celebrate, we're getting out. All 3 signed up again, or the 2 that were leaving signed up again. One of them didn't make it back. They died in this battle. This is one of the first units deployed to Vietnam. The 1st Infantry Division, the Marines went in 1965. Then the 173rd, I believe it was, Airborne. And then as far as a full division, it's the 1st Infantry Division, and they sent over some groups early and kind of filtered the rest through. This was the first group that went over. Because of that, some of the personnel were not going to be friends, because what they tried to do was get they cherry-picked the very best people out of the 1st Infantry Division to plug any holes that were needed for the first group going over. So some of the people were new. They are deployed around Saigon. In 1965, the reason we sent troops over is because William Westmoreland said, we're about to lose South Vietnam. We had advisors over there, but the government of South Vietnam was just going off in all different directions. They were losing a battalion of men a week to desertion. They were going to fall to communism. So that was why the decision was made to send troops over. And the first place you have to protect is Saigon. Now the plan was, once you protect Saigon, you can extend out and control more and more of the country. But these men are going to be near Saigon. I've heard lots of stories of drinking in Saigon. So if you look at the map, that circle that you see, here's Saigon down here. This was their operating area. There's going to be another unit over here, the 25th Tropic Lightning Division. But they're basically north of Saigon and a little to the east of Saigon as well. And that's where the battle is going to occur, over here. They were deployed in July of 1965, and as it says, the bleeding began almost immediately. The first casualty from Charlie Company was a self-inflicted wound. Everyone I interviewed about this guy, they all knew this story because it was the first thing that happened to them in Vietnam. The second or third day they were there, a Viet Cong soldier was killed. And the general in charge or colonel, someone, took the body, put it on a board, and then had everyone in the camp walk by the body so that they could look and see the enemy. Now, what they were seeing was not just a dead body. He was fairly well mutilated. His body was shot all to heck. Right after that, a man was on guard duty and somehow blew the tip of one of his fingers off. And the man who was with him on guard duty, he said, this soldier told me to go get some water, so I turned around and then I heard the rifle go off. And he would have had to put his finger on the rifle to blow it off and all that. So he said, yeah, he blew his own finger off. Everyone who I interviewed said that. I was able to track this man down. And first of all, everyone assumed from the beginning that he did it on purpose because he had actually been a star football player in college for the University of Michigan. And being a star football player, he was having a lot of friendly females come on to him, and he was married. And apparently his wife found out about it, and his wife's father was head of the local draft board.
Oh dear.
So he went off. That's right. So he goes off to Vietnam. But he was a gold brick. He was the kind of guy that when he could find a way around something, he found his way around it. Everybody knew that about him from his time at Fort Riley. He was always, somebody else ended up doing his work. So when his finger got blown off, everybody knew, oh, that's just who he is. So anyway, I was able to track this guy down and interview him over the phone. And we kind of danced around it for a while, and then I finally just, I might as well ask, did you blow your finger off on purpose? And he said, I am not going to say that I blew my finger off on purpose, but I will tell you this, I didn't want to be in Vietnam. So as far as I'm concerned, he admitted it. So that was the first guy. He got sent home. It worked. He got sent home. Yeah, sorry, he did that one. Okay, enlistment time was up for many of these guys. Again, if you watch movies about Vietnam, they're always talking about what? 365 days, my tour of duty. That's all I need to get through. But for these guys, it was a different situation because remember, they were in the Army before this. So some of them, their enlistments were almost up. One guy got sent over, he only had 2 weeks left. He said, why are you doing this? It's costing you more than, and I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to keep my head down while I'm over there. But he was there. He was there for 2 weeks. But that also meant that a lot of these guys who know what they're doing because they are professionals and they've trained with one another, begin to leave. And they are going to be replaced in a lot of cases by those draftees who are just being sent over because you need to plug holes. Attrition. You're going to have people start, as we do now in Afghanistan, people stepping on mines. That doesn't mean that they're killed, but they're wounded and taken out of action. So they had several snipers, shot some men. They were not killed, but they're going to leave the unit. They're going to be replaced by men who are draftees. Before we get to FNGs and tell you what that is, the first man killed was at the end of September of 1965. And everyone, of course, remembers that, the first man who died in Charlie Company. And what really, besides the fact that he was somebody everyone liked, he literally was the best soldier in the company. He'd won some kind of award contest back at Fort Riley where he had to break down the rifle in a certain amount of time and run the distance and carry the pack and do all those things that, kind of an Army Olympics. They had a contest like that at Fort Riley. He beat everybody. He's the best soldier around. He didn't do anything wrong, and he was hit by a sniper and killed. So that tells the guys in Charlie Company, besides, oh my gosh, our buddy's dead, it can happen to anyone. He didn't do anything wrong. Okay, in a cleaned up version, what does FNG mean? A new guy, those men coming in to replace those soldiers who are through attrition, either because they're being sent home because their enlistment's up or because they've been wounded, are replaced by what become known as FNGs, freaking new guys. You don't care about those people. They have not worked with you. Let's see, I should have it up here. Yeah. A new guy is dangerous. He's dangerous to himself and he's dangerous to you. He doesn't know what he's doing. So he can get you killed. My brother, talking about new guys, well, first of all, he saw his best friend killed. Early on in his war, he saw his best friend killed. And then these new guys come in and he said, yeah, I was worried that they'd get me killed. He said, but it also hurt too much to learn their names because they're the ones who are going to die. So he didn't bother to learn anybody else's name. Vietnam is sometimes called the one-year war we fought for 8 years because we kept sending people over for a one-year tour of duty. If you fought in World War II, like my father-in-law did, once he was in for the duration. A lot of those men just expected to die fighting. But in Vietnam, you start counting. I've got 364 days left. So in the first 3 months, you're just learning the ropes. You are a danger to yourself, you're a danger to those around you, and you're not going to kill many of the enemy unless it's by luck. For about 6, so if you survive it, by the way, there's one poor guy, or maybe he's lucky. He had spent less than a week in Vietnam when he gets involved in this battle, and he's wounded, and he's sent out. His entire Vietnam War experience was 1 week. So maybe that he's lucky in a way because he survived, and he didn't have to go through the whole year. But in the first 3 months, you're not going to know a lot. For about 6 months, you're going to be at the top of your game. You've learned, you've acclimatized to things. You know what to do. You know what risk to take. So you are a good fighting person. And then in the last 3 months, you might be counting really hard by that point. And historians have said that many times those people, I don't know if worthless is the right word, but they became very, very cautious. I can make it through this. I do know that for many of the men who survived this, they didn't have to fight again. Many of them never went on patrol. First, probably because of the horrible thing that they went through. But also, you're not good for anything anyway. Not at this point, not in the last few months. The gentleman that you see there survived the battle. He was at the time of the battle, he was a radio operator. He was shot in the eye. Later, he actually did do patrols. He was shot in the eye, lost his eye. He now lives in North Carolina in the mountains. And I don't know if y'all have seen this show, the new show Mountain Men. There's a show on History Channel called Mountain Men, and it's all these grizzled old guys who live up in the mountains. He's not one of them, but boy, I bet he's their neighbor. Because that's who he is. Every once in a while he sends me poetry that he writes about the North Carolina hills and stuff. All right. This battle will occur in April of 1966, so these men have not been, the unit hasn't been there for even a year. The operation where this battle will occur is called Operation Abilene. All the operations after I think it was January or February of 1966, were named after American cities. Before that, they had real good, solid, killing kind of Operation Smasher. That's a good one, Operation Smasher. But somebody, and I don't know who it was, said, well, you know, that's just so violent. No, we're only fighting a war. So instead, we're going to call it Abilene, or Cocoa Beach. Operation Cocoa Beach was one that was right before this. So they became the names of cities. Started in April of 1966. They are charged, and this is a large unit, you'll see this, with clearing an area just east of Saigon. There was a Viet Cong haven. The Viet Cong are the enemy, they're guerrilla fighters. But in this case, there were different kinds of Viet Cong. There's the guy who wears pajamas, and during the day he's in the city, he might cut your hair, he's polishing boots. And then at night he goes home, picks up a rifle, goes out and takes shots at the perimeter or something. But then there were Viet Cong, not North Vietnamese, but Viet Cong, who were full-time soldiers. And they basically hid in the jungle, and they operate in certain areas, and if you go there, you die. They are operating, and this group that they were hunting for is called D-800. The Americans are going to go into this area with 3 battalions. That's quite a few men. That's thousands of men going in to hunt for D-800. They are going into an area called Secret Zone Z. Secret Zone Z, I believe. I can't remember is Z or X. Anyway, it's just east of Saigon. There were several of these areas where we didn't go. We just marked them off the map, War Zone C, War Zone D. You don't go there. There's too many Viet Cong there. So if we go there, we go in big, big numbers. But you just don't send in patrols. They won't come back. And War Zone C, War Zone D, northwest of Saigon, were huge areas. And there were some huge battles fought. This is a much smaller area, but we need to get rid of it. So we are going to send in 3 battalions to take on this D-800. The Army knew from the beginning D-800 would have the advantage. I've read the intelligence reports, and that's what it says. They're going to be watching us. This is their territory. We're playing by their rules. Charlie Company, at the same time as this began, received its 3rd commander in a month and a half. You need some consistency. And the commander they had at the beginning of the being deployed over there, men didn't love him. None of these guys talked about loving their officers, but they respected him. And they respected him because he didn't do silly things that got him killed. He did what he was supposed to do. Sometimes you got killed, but he did what they were, he made the right kind of decisions. But he was only there 6 months, because that's essentially what officers had to do, 6 months. The next officer that came in, nobody liked him, including the other officers. And so it's kind of a little mystery what exactly happened. You talk to the junior officers, and they will tell you that they maneuvered to get this guy kicked out. I spoke to that officer, and he said he went on a secret mission to the Philippines. So I don't know. You know, the war was in Vietnam, so how secret does it have to be in the Philippines? But it could have been. And then the poor guy that they put in after this, he was, again, as it says there, he was very earnest, but he didn't know what he was doing. He had not a clue, and told his junior officers what he really wanted to be was a chaplain. He's going to lead a combat unit, and he really wants to be a chaplain. It's called ticket punching. Right. They had one guy, he was never going to get to go to the front. He was an officer, so they said, well, we'll take you out on a patrol. He got shot on that patrol because he didn't know what the hell he was doing. So yeah, they rotated those guys too quick, which essentially means this guy knows nothing about combat, because remember, in the first 3 months, you're not going to know anyway. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's called ticket punching. Oh, what was this last? Okay, so the newbies, the FNGs, these new guys that are coming in, over half the company by this time who joined the company in late March were in country less than a month, because all those old guys, their enlistments are up and they're being shipped home, so that there's a disproportionate number of new guys. And the old hands, it's 8 months. They're counting down. They're exhausted. All right, little contact for the first 3 weeks, except on the first day. On the first day, at the end of the day, a soldier, well, let's play a little game. Pretend you are a sniper. You are a Viet Cong sniper. Who are you going to shoot? Which one? You going to shoot the guy in the front?
In the rear.
Guy in behind. I've also, a guy who, former Marine who was also an Army guy, he was at this battle, said I'd shoot the guy in the middle because that would cause confusion. But you shoot the guy in the back, possibly they don't even know that they've been shot. But what if that guy in the front has a big target right on his chest? What if he had a target on his chest? Who are you going to shoot? I think I would shoot the guy with the target. You see, on the first day of combat, there was a young soldier. His last name was Golden, and he was Golden. He was a California surfer. He was this great-looking guy. Everybody liked him, and he had a girlfriend, and she was the hottest thing around. He would tell you all the time, I've got the most beautiful girlfriend there is. Until finally somebody said, well, show us a picture. He didn't have a picture, so he wrote home to her and said, send me a picture of yourself. And she did, in a bikini. And he was very proud of it. He passed it around, and it's in the jungle, and the humidity, all these guys putting their grimy hands on it, it disintegrated. And so he wrote back to her, and he said, send me another picture, but do something to it. Put it in cellophane, do something so that it doesn't fall apart. And so she put it in some kind of plastic, and when he got that picture, he hung it around his neck. So he has his girlfriend's picture, which is a target. Now, several guys told me about the picture. One guy insisted, no, it was a target. In his mind, because that's what combat does to you, it's subjective, all he ever saw it as was a target. And sure enough, Golden was digging in at the end of the first day, and a shot rang out, and he went down. Now, there's a guy I know. He was a medic. His name is Fisher, and it was his second or third week in country, but he hadn't seen anybody hurt till then. He runs over, and Golden wasn't hit in the chest, which you would think maybe that's where he was aiming, maybe not. But he was hit above the eye, and he's lying on the ground, and Fisher ran over to him, and he put his hand under his head. And he said, when I did, I put my hand into his brains, because the bullet hole was small here, and it blew out the back of his head. And so he was obviously dead. He said, but I couldn't leave the guy. He said, I had to try to keep his brains in his head. He said, when the helicopter came in to lift him off, he said, I went with him because I couldn't let his, in his mind, I couldn't let his brains just lie there. Fisher's going to go through a lot. I think personally, Fisher should have gotten a Medal of Honor for what he did. So anyway, that's the very first day of this thing. After that, for 3 weeks, nothing happened. They tramped around in the jungle. But something did happen. Somehow there was a snafu, because they were supposed to be rotated out before this time. There are 3 battalions, and they're not all out there at once. They're sending in fresh guys over and over again. But for some reason, nobody called Charlie Company in. They stay out for a full 3 weeks. On Easter Sunday of 1966, they are It's the end of the day. They come to a large clearing. Now, they didn't run out into the clearing. You would never do that. You would never go out into a clearing. But they waited on the edge of a clearing for helicopters to come in and a priest to come off the helicopter and give them their Easter service. They're all in the tree line watching this guy. And he went through his program, and then he's packing up everything, and he turned around and he looked over this field, and it's a big field. But he goes, "Hey, who are those three guys over there?" And at the same time that happened, some forward observation post said, radioed in, "We've got scouts." And so the men who were, it wasn't the whole company, it was the second platoon who had been at the service, did something they weren't supposed to do. And maybe they did it because they were tired. It was 3 weeks. For some reason, all these guys stood up and started running across the field. They're shooting at those 3 men. Now, this is the oldest trick in the book. It literally has been used in ancient times. You lure somebody out with a few men. And one man went down immediately. One of the scouts went down immediately. Another scout went down, hit, but he's not dead. When they started running across the fields, one of the guys who participated said it was like a Wild West show. Everybody's shooting. You've got grenade launchers going off, shotguns, machine guns. They're just blasting this area. Nothing can possibly survive, except one of those 3 guys got away. As far as they know, he wasn't hit. When they reached these 3 men, or 2 men, one is dead, one is in pain. He's shot fairly severely. And one of the sergeants went over to the dead man and cut off his ears and walked around saying, "Look, I got his ears. Y'all want his ears?" It was a souvenir. Remember that guy. Remember that story. The other one that was still alive, a lieutenant went up to him. He had, he only speaks Vietnamese, so he had a translator with him. The lieutenant did, and he said, "Ask him if he's with D-800. After all, that's the point. We want to know if D-800 is around here." The Vietnamese translator, our buddy, said something to him. He said, "Nope, he's not part of D-800. Said he was just out here." An American soldier standing back there a ways came up and whispered in the lieutenant's ear, "I speak a little bit of this language," and he said he was with D-800. And so the lieutenant walked over to the body and put his boot in the wound and began to grind it and said, "What did you say?" By the way, this American lieutenant is a millionaire. He didn't have to be there. He owns a candy company, still does. But I'm saying it because it happened. He's trying to keep his men alive. Are you with the 800? And the guy acknowledged at that point that he was. So, forgot about this. Remember I told you about Fisher, the medic who tried to keep that guy's brains in his head. He went, when he saw all this happen, he looked at his sergeant and he said, "Why did we do this? Why didn't we try to capture these guys?" Because what he's seeing is cruelty. Somebody's got their ear cut off. This guy's torturing this man. And the sergeant's response, because the sergeant's been there a while, is, "I don't want to have to tell your mama why you died. You shoot first, you ask questions later. If we tried to do what you just said, Americans would have died." And Fisher said, "At that point, I didn't believe it. This was horrible." He said, "But within 24 hours, I would understand perfectly what he meant." So anyway, the lieutenant radioed the general in charge of the 1st Infantry Division. His name is William Depew. "We have found D-800. And William Depew said, "Prepare for a fight." They dug in that night, Easter Sunday, expecting to be hit. This is going to be a major battle. Nothing happened. All night long, they're on high alert, nothing happens. So the next morning, they're told, come on in. It's what they wanted to hear. Go march east for however long it is to these coordinates, and then you'll be airlifted out. The men are happy. This is what they got to march through. It's April 11th. Yeah, which you can't get through. An early patrol goes out and it finds 3 trails through this mess. Do you walk on trails?
Oh, no.
Never. Never do you walk on a trail. The commander was new. The commander was tired of being out in the jungle. The commander said, we're going to take the trails. I've heard varying stories. One story goes that a sergeant went up to him and said, you want to rethink this. Other people have told me, no, he would have never done that. The first picture that I had with the guy carrying the machine gun, from what I understand about that man, he would have said something because he is a veteran of World War II. But you don't want to do this. You don't want to go on a trail. That's the Who built the trails?
The enemy.
The enemy. But that's what they did. They followed the trails. And they're going to have contact. They're marching along these trails. They're heading eastward. They started early in the morning. At 11:15, they had their first contact. Snipers began to harass the leading platoon and didn't hit anyone. Marty radioed back, we have contact, what do you want me to do? And the commander, whose name was Nolan said, chase them, let's get them. Until they get exactly where the Viet Cong want them. And then at 1:55, they opened up on them. 2 men are wounded. Marty Crow edges forward, and he is getting coordinates to bring in artillery attack. The Vietnamese have a way to counter that. They get in close. They come in and they hug the belt. They're so close to you that if they get hit, you get hit. The problem, though, was not with calling in the artillery strike. Somebody got the coordinates wrong. The artillery came pouring down, and now we're in the jungle. Think of that picture. The artillery hits the tops of the trees, creating giant splinters, spears, that come hurtling down directly into Charlie Company. They missed. Marty blamed himself. Marty, who was one of the toughest old cobs I've ever met, wonderful man, broke down crying. He blames himself for that. Now, other people told me it was not his fault. Somebody messed up, though. And the first man killed in Charlie Company was killed by essentially a giant spear, a branch coming down that stuck him and killed him right there as he's walking through. This causes chaos. The artillery is landing inside Charlie Company. One man who was a veteran of the Korean War, a very steady guy, lost it. Started running around saying, we're all going to die. We're all going to die. Somebody knocked him down, tried to control him. He gets back up. Artillery goes off. He was killed by the artillery. He fell down, and when he fell down, the way it was described to me was he fell face first or fell belly first, but he was still looking up because the artillery sliced his face, and like a seam, it's looking up. So there's chaos in the beginning. D-800 base camp. 500 to 130. Usually we outnumbered them, but we walked right into where they wanted us to walk. Now, they weren't planning this for Charlie Company. This was their defense plan. Anytime someone came near them, this is what they were going to do. They have this all waiting for an American unit. Okay, what I want to point out first is this really big gun. Yeah. They called it actually a 51.
It is a 51.
Yeah. They had 3 of them. It's meant to take out vehicles. It's not anti-personnel, it's to take out vehicles. They have them pointed at American foot soldiers. So there are 3 of these things set up, plus 30 caliber machine guns, and they opened up all at once. Exactly when the American forces were where the Viet Cong wanted them, they opened up on them. It was a hurricane of steel. In the first moment, the commander of the company, 3 of the 4 platoon sergeants, and you don't want to lose those guys, were wounded. So from the very beginning, there's not a lot of command and control. It's gone from the beginning. Marty is up there, and he's wounded almost immediately. And as you can see, Nolan, who is the commander, and then Alderson was his XO, they're both wounded as well. Nolan was told to listen to his other officers. That's how bad he was. That you can't do this. But he's, I guess, because he had to get his time in, we're still going to give you people to command. Anyway, when this started and the hurricane of steel is just tearing through these men, again, several of the men just fell to the ground, never fired a shot. The rest of the men basically describe it as individual combat. They're not getting orders from anyone. They're fighting to save their lives. Nolan finally sends a message to Marty Crow, who is in the front where that 51 caliber is just blowing everything away. And he orders Marty and his platoon, the one that's hardest hit, to lead a breakout. Marty's already wounded. Marty was wounded 6 times that day. He can't go, so he turned to his platoon sergeant, who was the only platoon sergeant not at that time wounded. This particular platoon sergeant was one of those 3 men that I mentioned to you, who one had been a best man at a wedding where they signed up again. In fact, right before this occurred, right before the battle really started, he had drifted back to see his 2 buddies who were both in 1st platoon. And they sat down under a tree. And this man produced a beer. Where the hell did he get a beer in the middle of the jungle? But that's the kind of guy he was. He was a scavenger. He also, his nickname is Round Man because he's heavy. How do you stay heavy in the middle of the jungle? Because he always had food. He could always find something. He's like a character out of a movie, but that's how everyone remembers him. His nickname is the Round Man. So they're sitting there, these 3 good friends. They'd gone on fishing trips together back home. They're sharing this beer, and then the snipers began again, and Round Man made a joke. He said, "I'm getting out of here. I'm going up front where it's not so hot." So he goes up to the front. Marty gets the order. We need to break out. Marty can't do it because Marty's already shot all up. So he tells Round Man, "Find 6 guys and get out there, or find some men and get out there." So Round Man, essentially it was 6 men that he was able to convince or order or whatever. And I interviewed another guy who did not go on the attack, but he was part of 3rd Platoon, who said his memory of this was, he said it was like a Hollywood movie. He said, "I saw those 6 men stand up and charge out into that jungle in slow motion." He says, "I know they weren't going in slow motion." He says, "But in my head, it will always be in slow motion. And I watched them all get cut down." Round Man gets pretty far out there and is tackled by 2 Viet Cong. He is wrestling with 2 men when the 51 caliber turns on him, killing him and the 2 men who they're fighting. The guy on the gun doesn't care. Literally cut him in half at the waist. One survivor was a young man. Well, before I get to that, these are the kind of trees that were out there, and most of the men are hiding behind the trees now. That's the only protection you have. And behind one tree there are 3 men. I'll come back to those in a moment. There is one survivor of the initial attack, and it's that boy. I want you to look at his face. He is a boy. He wasn't even 18 when he went to Vietnam. He turned 18 while he was there. He was not allowed to go on patrols when he first went to Vietnam. They called him Peanuts. He was the mascot. You ask somebody of all those 50 survivors, hey, did you know Peanuts? Oh, sure I knew Peanuts. Peanuts was my best friend. 50 men all claiming that Peanuts was my best friend. Again, he's a boy. He made it out there. By the way, he carried a grenade launcher, and they said he was deadly with it. He could hit anything he wanted with that grenade launcher, but he cried himself to sleep every night, according to one soldier that I talked to. All right, so there are 3 men hiding behind a tree. That is John Ollie Lang there, who ended up going into the FBI, and just this man's entire life story is incredible. 3 men, John Ollie Lang, Richard Garner, and Dave Burris. And again, all 3 of these men called Peanuts their best friend. They are close enough that they hear, "Come and help me. I'm hit. Come and help me, Ollie." He calls them by name. "Dave, come and help me. John, come and help me." But if you stick your head out from behind this tree, you are dead, because the machine gun is a 51 caliber and it's blowing everything to hell. They lay there and they call, "Keep your head down, Peanuts. We're coming," but you can't move. Finally, Ollie couldn't take it anymore. Ollie jumps out from behind the tree and sprints out into where the Viet Cong are. And he starts screaming, "Peanuts, Peanuts, where are you?" Peanuts isn't yelling anymore. "Peanuts, where are you?" He finds the bodies of all the dead Americans. Peanuts won't say anything. "Peanuts, where are you?" He comes across the round man, and he said, "I picked up both pieces, and I carried him back to the perimeter. And as he's getting behind the tree, he's hit in the calf. So he can't go out anymore." And he said, "Before I passed out, I hear, 'Ollie, come help me.'" Peanuts is still alive. He's out there. Maybe he had passed out, and he begins to call again. The whole area was surrounded. The man you see there, his name was Fulford. And I'm glad I have a picture of him with a helmet, because Fulford was back here. I think I have it. Yeah. Back here on the other side of the perimeter. And he's shooting away. And he was hit in the head by a sniper. The bullet, though, came from up and behind him, hitting the helmet, going down, and then piercing his eye. He kept the helmet, by the way. I saw the helmet. It went in and blinded him in one eye. And what happens in a situation like that oftentimes is when you're hit in one eye, you'll temporarily go blind in both eyes. So he goes blind, and he knows it's bad. He said, I made sure my helmet stayed on. He said, but I couldn't do anything. I'm blind. I can't see anything. He said, so I just leaned up against a tree waiting to die. Something's going to happen to me, but I can't do anything about it. Fisher, that medic that I mentioned, medics have the worst job in the world. I respect them so much because they can't just lay there. They can't stay behind the tree. When somebody calls them, they are trained to get up and go and help them. And so Fisher is running from place to place helping these people. And he told me this story. He said, I saw this man with a helmet on, but blood, his face is just covered in blood. So I went over to help him, and he said, of all the people I helped that day, and you know, he's told me some horrendous stories that I can't tell today. He said, but of all the people that I helped, that's the one that was most frustrating, because I could see that that helmet was split, that the helmet had saved his life. So I didn't want him to take the helmet off. So I'm trying to put this bandage up under his helmet and keep the helmet on. He said it was so frustrating. Well, those two men didn't know each other. And through my interviews, I was able to identify, because they told me two stories. They didn't know, Fulford didn't know who Fisher was. Fisher didn't know who Fulford was. But when I got those stories, I was able to contact both of them and say, I know who did this, who helped you, or I know who that guy was that you were so frustrated with. So at that reunion in 2001, where there was a lot of drinking going on, and it was both one of the happiest things I've ever seen and one of the saddest things I've ever seen. But it was a lot of fun. Fisher was there first, and I was sitting with Fisher. And by the way, we had tables pretty much like this, and we're sitting at the table and we're talking. And Fulford walked in, and he's a man with very thick glasses because he's still blind in one eye. He comes in and he's carrying that helmet, and Fisher saw him. He didn't say a word to me. He just got up and he went over and he started talking to the man he had saved. And those two men went over into a corner. And they didn't come out of that corner for 2 or 3 hours. While everybody else is going around drinking and laughing and stuff, that was a heartfelt conversation over there. It was, for me, one of the most touching things I've ever seen, because they didn't know it. They didn't know that two parts of that story till that moment. So Fulford was saved, but the real point of that was he got shot from behind and from above, because not only did they have machine guns set up on the perimeters, they had snipers in the trees in the perimeter. There was no safe place. Wherever you were, you could be hit. Bosie Gerald is the gentleman standing up there. Bosie was a very tough platoon sergeant for 4th Platoon, and he was wounded early in the battle. He and a man named Harris, and Harris is the man leaning down there. They got hit by a claymore, and a claymore is a directional mine that knocked them both out. Well, I can't say for sure about Bosie. I do know that it knocked Harris out. When Harris woke up, Bosie is against a tree, and he is severely wounded. And he is also calling out to guys for help. But he's not saying, hey, Ollie, come help me, I'm hit. You get out here and you help me now, because he's a sergeant and he knows how to get things done. Get out here and help me. Over and over again, he's saying this. Nobody's going to go out there because of the machine guns. And Harris, who's hurt, is lying there, and he's watching Bosie slowly get weaker and weaker. It's finally going to get dark, and when it gets dark, Bosie changed what he was saying. Get out here and kill me. He's suffering so badly. The Bosie, as you can see that from the arrow, he's over there. This says screams through the night. He screamed for much of the night, but finally when the VC come in, Harris had fallen asleep, passed out, however you want to put it. And he said, when I woke up, something told me not to open my eyes, because he felt a jostling. He was on his stomach, and he felt somebody moving him around. He said, I just pretended to be dead. He said, and then they stopped, and I could hear someone moving away from me. He said, I opened my eyes, and of course he was pointed towards Bosie, and he said, I watched as the VC walked over to Bosie, who was still alive, and he bent down, He saw that he was alive, and he took his pistol, and he pulled the trigger and killed him. Is that murder? Because that's what happened. What else? Okay, now I'm going to tell you about some of those Medal of Honors. This is a very interesting story. There is a slight chance, and it's probably only slight, that this is going to be made into a movie someday. There were people in Hollywood interested in this story at the same time I was, and they were interested because of what I'm about to tell you. Okay, Charlie Company had to be there. That was their orders. They had been out there for 3 weeks. But when this all started happening, they called for an airlift, bring in the Army helicopters, get these guys out. And the Army helicopters came in, hovered over the combat for a short while, and as you said, those are anti-aircraft machine guns. So the helicopters radioed down, "We can't help you, it's too dangerous," and they took off. In Vietnam, everything that went on over the radio. Everybody could hear it. And there was an Air Force pararescue unit nearby. Air Force pararescue, their job is to go and get downed pilots. Nowadays, you can see them in things, they go out to sea and they'll pick people who their ships have sunk and those kind of things. Anyway, this Air Force unit here's what's going on, and when they hear that the Army helicopters will not help, they volunteer. They don't have to do that. They say, "Hey, we'll go." Yep, we go back. That gentleman there, it was his day off. He just was hanging around base. What can you do in Vietnam? He's hanging around the base, but he doesn't have to go, even if his group has volunteered to go. But he walked over and he said, "Hey, you mind if I tag along?" So he got on the helicopter, and 2 helicopters go out. And what pararescue does is they have something called a jungle penetrator. It can be dropped. It's on a long chain, whatever it is. Cable. It drops down and it can just go right through the jungle, and then it opens up and you can put somebody on there and ride them up through the jungle. So they go out and they hover while the Viet Cong are shooting at them. They hover and they drop the jungle penetrator. The guys of Charlie Company, who have lots and lots of wounded, they don't know how this thing operates. They're struggling with it. And that guy, the one who it was his day off, who didn't have to be there, he said, "Hey, send me down there so that he can help them." He's lowered down there. One of the things that everybody remembers, and I don't know how everyone could remember it, but they all do. So I think they've added to this because they love this man so much. They'll tell you they saw his clean boots and his nice uniform. How could this guy didn't have to be there and he's coming down, he lowers himself down, he assists 12 men. He saves 12 men's lives. But then the 3 machine guns that can knock something out of the sky all start shooting at the helicopter. So the commander of the helicopter said, signaled to this man. His name, by the way, is Pitzenbarger. "Come on up." He started to get on the jungle penetrator. And then another man, a man named Blankenheim, who I've interviewed, he said, we kind of locked eyes. He said, and I must have looked desperate. Blankenheim had been shot in the rear end, which is not because he was running, but when you're lying down, some parts of you stick up sometimes. And so Pitzenbarger went, and he gave his ride to Blankenheim. He goes up, the helicopters go off. It's his day off. He's volunteered to stay. Now, he doesn't fight. He's not a fighter, but he's wherever somebody needs help. He's loading weapons. He's helping people who are hurt. And at one point, there's a gentleman who's still alive who lives over in San Antonio who was badly wounded, and this was after dark, and this was when the Viet Cong were coming in, and it was pretty hopeless. Everybody thought they were going to die. So all 50 of these men thought they were going to die. This guy's lying there, and Pitzenbarger comes up to him and takes some dead bodies, American soldiers, and he lays them on top of him. He said, whatever you do, don't move. Don't move. You're dead. And so Pitzenbarger begins to walk away, and that gentleman said, I opened my eyes and I watched him go down. I watched him hit and I watched him fall. And officially, in the Medal of Honor commendation, that's how he died. That's not how he died. He was wounded, but they found him the next day and he had a gas mask on with a bullet hole through it, because they did, the Viet Cong used gas to try to come in. And so he had put on a gas mask so he could, get through all of this. At some point, he probably lost enough blood. He was lying there, and the Viet Cong, just as they had done Bosie Gerald, came in and shot him. For whatever reason, his commendation doesn't want to say that he was killed in that way, that instead he was killed while he was moving. Those commendations sometimes have a way of not telling the whole story. I'm going to win the Medal of Honor. There was a man, a replacement, who he was a former Marine and got out of the Marines and just couldn't live the quiet life of a former Marine, so he joined the Army. He was in the guard detail for William Westmoreland, but that wasn't exciting enough. So he volunteered to get into a combat unit, and he ended up in Charlie Company. And when he ended up in Charlie Company, now my understanding is that you always met the company commander. It may have just been a handshake, welcome, and goodbye. But this guy goes up to the commander and says, just so you know, I'm going to win the Medal of Honor. Well, you don't say that. It's not like playing a football game. You can't say, I'm going to win this one. It's something that happens to you. I'm going to win the Medal of Honor. His name was Robinson, and he was very gung-ho, as Marines tend to be. In fact, I talked to someone, he was a sergeant, who was in his fire team, and I asked about him. He said, well, he was always running everywhere. Other people would walk, he runs. And then I asked him, well, did you like Robinson? And this guy said, oh, I didn't like to run. So he probably thought he was a little too gung-ho. But he was also the right guy to be around. When this fight started, he, like Fisher, was everywhere, except he's fighting. The entire time he's fighting. Right here, I don't know if you can read that, but it says 3 major Viet Cong assaults from this direction, which is, by the way, their base camp. So they are hitting a place called 4th Platoon, and he's from 1st Platoon. He's not even in that group, but he moves over because they needed him there. And at one point, there were 4 Americans fighting hand-to-hand against an assault of Viet Cong. He was one of those people. 2 of them died. Another one was wounded. Died later, and Robinson, they stopped it. He goes out. At one point, Fisher, by the way, is a very small man. Fisher had gone out of the perimeter to try to help a wounded man who was very large. It was impossible. This guy's big, Fisher's small. He's kind of dragging him. Suddenly, Robinson appears and picks up the wounded man, heaves him over his shoulder, and grabs Fisher like a child and pulls them into the perimeter. At one point, he's running along the perimeter and he's hit by tracer shells. If you watch those movies, the tracers are so that people can see where the bullets are going, and it ignites his clothing. His pants are on fire as he's running through the jungle. Finally, at some point, just at dark, he noticed or saw the 51 was tearing into his own platoon. And so he charged it. He charged that big machine gun. Now, a 50 caliber or 51 caliber shell does not need to hit you to kill you. If it passes close enough to you, it can tear your arm off. He charges it. Now, in the official commendation, he's hit twice and keeps going. I don't think so. In fact, I know so because I've talked to eyewitnesses. Now, what he did was very brave, and he did knock out that machine gun. It's incredible. And he was wounded, but he was probably wounded by small arms fire from other people shooting him. He took out this machine gun. Then he turned around, goes back inside the perimeter, and he's the first one who kind of gets, hey, there are snipers inside our perimeter. So he starts running from tree to tree looking to see if there's a sniper, and he begins to play a cat and mouse game where he's hunting for them while they're hunting for him. And he kills several of them until finally, at some point in the battle, a gentleman told me, he said, I was laying there and I watched Robinson run by, so I was trying to see what he was doing. He said, I saw him go like this with his rifle, and he said, then I saw him just driven to the ground. A sniper shot him first. For some reason, that's not brave enough. That's not included in the commendation. He had to be shot by anti-vehicle fire to get the award. And I don't understand that, but that's what they did. So Robinson was killed actually inside the perimeter. This goes on all afternoon. Time and time again, people are being they're being pressured, there's snipers, and it's just horrible. Night falls, and when night fell, the Viet Cong began to use bullhorns to communicate with each other over the perimeter, like from this side, calling over to that side, apparently get ready, we're going to charge. But where's the rest of the American forces? Why are these guys out there by themselves? When the artillery misfired, when it came down inside the perimeter, the general of the division, William Depew, heard what was going on, and he ordered the artillery to stop. And then he forgot to ever tell it to start again. Under my orders, cease fire. And the whole point of this little operation is to blow up the enemy as they come in on the perimeter. That was our strategy. That's how we were surrounded many, many times during Vietnam. That was just kind of what happened. He also, Depew, miscalculated where his other troops were. In a personal letter that he wrote to the lieutenant in charge of 2nd Platoon, he said, by the way, officially he said, we never did this, but he told him, you were bait. We hung you out there so that the enemy would see an isolated unit and attack, because that's typically what the enemy did. If they saw a chance to win, they'd attack. If they didn't, they just melted back into the jungle. The problem was Depew thought he had two A Company and B Company that could get there quickly, but in that jungle they couldn't. So all that night, Charlie Company is surrounded with the Viet Cong coming in, murdering various wounded people, because the wounded people can't get into the perimeter. Nobody can get out. Marty Crow up there, you can see his X where he was wounded. There are several people dead around him. And one of the horrible things for this man was that because he was the lieutenant, and because I don't know if he was moving or just because they knew where he was, but men from his platoon would try to go out and get him. And every time somebody came out to get him, the Viet Cong killed them. He said he saw 6 men die at his feet trying to come and save him. Can you imagine the the guilt he felt for the rest of his life. As it became obvious that they were going to pour through, that they were going to come through, Marty's lying there, and he realizes that there's somebody next to him that's alive. It was his radio operator named Carpenter who had been wounded. And they can hear the Viet Cong coming in. They're about to die, and they knew they were going to die. So Marty grabbed Carpenter by the hand, and now Marty's a little bit older. He was he was an enlisted man who became an officer, so he's been around a while. He grabbed Carpenter's hand. Carpenter's a young man, and he said, "Son, let's say the Lord's Prayer." And they whispered the Lord's Prayer, and he said, "Now, be very quiet. No matter what happens, be very quiet." And they walked over. Marty closes his eyes. They walked over to Marty, and they essentially undressed him. They took everything from him. He said, "But I just pretended to be dead." He said, "But then they went to Carpenter, and he's got a radio on his back." So he said, "I could feel them moving him, and I could hear things." And he said, "And then I heard the loudest sound I've ever heard in my life. I heard a 45 go off, because apparently Carpenter started to resist, and they murdered him right there, right next to it. And he has to pretend to be dead." So Marty laid out most of the night, and finally, towards dawn, someone crawled by him. And this happened a lot, by the way. These guys are just trying to find some place that's safe. Crawled by him, and he kind of reached out and grabbed me and said, "Stop, what are you doing?" He said, "I'm getting out of here." He said, "No, you got to go get somebody to help me." Marty had been hit by rifle fire, by grenades. He couldn't walk. He says, "You got to go get somebody to help me." And this guy did it. I mean, he could have just crawled off, but he went, he told Nolan, and a couple of guys volunteered to go out. They crawled out, and they reached Marty. By that time, Marty was delirious. And so when these guys started dragging him back, they're not picking him up, they're not walking, he started calling out cadence to them, giving them orders. And their whole concern was, he's being loud, and we're trying not to get killed. They didn't make it back. As dawn broke the next day on April 12th, finally B Company manages to come in here. And they're not shot at or anything, because what the Viet Cong did was they killed enough people. They decided not to overrun because they had killed enough. Why risk any of our guys when we can just get away now? They left a few snipers. B Company comes in, and over here in 4th Platoon. In 4th Platoon there was a soldier by the name, his last name is Love. And Love is lying out there on the perimeter. He's shooting at anything that moves, but it's been quiet for a while. And then he hears RC's movement just in front of him. And he said, "I don't know why I did it," but I said, "Who's there?" Instead of just shooting, I said, "Who's there?" And he heard Peanuts. Even this guy in another platoon knows Peanuts. Everybody knows Peanuts. They love him. He said, "Well, come on, crawl this way." What had happened, Peanuts had been wounded up here and crawled all night in the wrong direction. Had he crawled this way, he would have been safe. He gets over here, and Love's saying, "Keep your head down, but crawl this way." As he got closer and closer, Love keeps saying, "Keep your head down." And when he could clearly see Peanuts' face, Peanuts, overjoyed, delirious for whatever reason, pushed up, his head's above the grass, and a sniper shot him in the back of the head. He was the last person killed in the battle. It's a happy story, isn't it? These are photographs that were taken by news people that went out there, and you can see all these bodies. The gentleman who's Sitting here, his name is Harris also, and he was very young. He was 18 as well, and he is just stunned. He's looking at the bodies of his friends. And so that was the last picture taken of the battle. Again, 40 men died in the battle, and then several more died later on. The Pitzenbarger, the Air Force member who won the Medal of Honor, did not receive the medal until the year 1999. When the discussions were, everybody got a medal, by the way. Everybody. You know, you get defeated, you better give out medals to cover it up. It's kind of what it was like. When they were giving out medals, they said, well, we can't, this was an Army operation, we can't give out a Medal of Honor to an Air Force guy. He wasn't even supposed to be there. So their reasoning was the very same reasoning that later men of Charlie Company kept writing their congressman so that this man would get an award.